Kia ora, welcome to episode 91 of Talking Dairy, your go-to podcast for New Zealand dairy farmers. When a dry spell hits or pasture growth doesn't go as planned, it can feel like there's no time to pause and make decisions. But the reality is that the most effective response isn't just acting fast, it's acting smart. Whether you're choosing a supplement or looking at other ways to manage your feed situation, understanding the cost-effectiveness and timing of your choices is key. I'm your host, Jack McGowan, and joining us today are two guests who know this topic inside and out. Mark Williams, a farm systems specialist at DairyNZ, and Enda Hawe, a Rakaia dairy farmer. We discuss everything from choosing the right supplements for your circumstances and the concept of marginal milk, to how tools like the DairyNZ supplement price calculator can help you make the best decisions. Plus, we'll explore proactive steps you can take now to minimise the impact of future feed shortages. Tēnā korua, thanks for joining us today, Enda and Mark. Let's start with you, Mark. You're a farm systems specialist with DairyNZ. What's that role about?
My role is a midpoint between our regional teams and the science teams at DairyNZ. So my main role is to turn scientific content into farmer-friendly information for not only our regional teams to use, but for social media. Beautiful things like this podcast, media articles. Yeah, just putting a farm systems context around it and trying to answer some of the farmer questions that would come from sound bites they would see about different things going on at DairyNZ.
So making sure that those of us that are fixated on just one subject don't get a bit crazy and forget about everything else that happens on farm.
Joining the dots is the way to put it. I'm a dot joiner.
Yeah, joining the dots. Okay. And what's your background, Mark?
I've been a farmer before. That's where I met Enda, down in mid-Canterbury. Was down there as a share milker originally. Then I went farm owning before moving back to the mighty North Island to continue dairy farming. I've also been a consulting officer for both Dexcel and DairyNZ and worked for Westpac Agribusiness at one stage as well. So I've been around a few years.
You don't look old enough to have had all that under your belt, Mark.
I started when I was 10, Jack.
Oh, right. All right, let's bring in Enda. Judging by the laughing that's going on, you're not going to be quite so complimentary about Mark. But let's start with you. Tell us a little about yourself.
I'm born and raised in Ireland and have spent the majority of my life in New Zealand, been here 26 years. I came equipped with the agricultural science degree and have basically started at the junior ranks in the dairy industry and now find myself in a farm ownership position in the middle of Rakaia, mid-Canterbury, 700 cows. I love what I do, and my best hours are from 3 a.m. onwards. So doing exactly what I don't want to do, where I want to do it, and married with 3 lovely kids as well.
Very nice. Enda, what's your approach to feed planning? You said you have 700 cows and you're in Canterbury. What kind of system do you run?
We run a system to be just below 4. We feed throughout the year, majority on the shoulders. If we come under pressure or dry, which we don't normally, we might be putting in something in December, January, but very little. So the main aim is to calve 700 and get 700 or out the other end on June 1 before we make any dry off decisions. So we aim to maximise the days in milk throughout the season, and there's no point compacting calving them at the start if you're going to dry them off early. So I want to get as many solids as I can out the gate, and typically we do about 540 kilos per cow to the factory. It's about 2,000 kilos a hectare.
Has your approach or the kind of system you run changed over the years you've been farming here?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I've been on 5 different properties, ranging from border dike irrigation to no supplement fed at all to higher input where we fed every day during the season. So you adapt as you go to the situation you're placed in. I've come through droughts, earthquakes, prolonged snow, plenty of planning prevents poor performance. So regardless of where you're thrown in at the deep end, you got to have budgets and weekly farm walks, which they're mandatory. They're done so often and redone and revisited. So to make key decision making, you need previous history and a bit of crystal balling going forward.
I was going to ask Enda a question.
Oh, yeah.
From his point of view, what has been the biggest change he's seen in farm systems in the last 10 years? What have you seen as a difference happening?
Definitely, most farmers that I know are feeding supplement and a large quantity of it. And like you said, Mark, the higher you can stock your farm, add some supplement, is easier to manage your pasture. You grow a lot more pasture because you're eating it and you're cleaning it out. And it's easier farm because you don't have to make the decisions whether you need to make silage. It's harder to analyze a surplus coming up. You can feed to a deficit and adequately feed your cows a lot better. So I have seen a shift in the system 3 is no longer in Canterbury, or very, very few farmers. The system now is 4 and going into the bordering 5s. And that is, from a management point of view, I reckon it's easier.
Yeah, it ties in with a lot of the regional data we're seeing at the moment, where total feed per hectare, so that's grown and imported, has actually increased in most areas of the country, while at the same time in quite a few areas we're actually seeing pasture eaten dropping. And we're still getting to the bottom of, is it through management or is it through less growth? And people are just having to buy more supplements in certain areas.
The reduced use of nitrogen has lent itself to growing less pasture. I know myself in the last 7 years, in the first 3 to 4, I was happily able to make silage at a stocking rate of 4 cows the hectare. I'm struggling to make silage now.
So today we're focusing on managing and meeting feed demand and how do we handle deficits when they come up. Mark, I'm curious, farm system specialist Mark, does farm system influence how likely a deficit is and what the options a farmer has are?
Yes, it does. So we've been doing a series of events around the country talking about this, and Enda and I caught up about this very question. The system you run can drive a deficit itself. So the more cows per hectare you put on, the more you rely on supplements to get through a season. So if you're stocking a farm higher than pasture growth curve, you're having to make those planned seasonal decisions every year. And one of the things you've got to be really good at as a farmer is being flexible, tying your feed budget with your financial budget and being flexible to go, okay, one feed I normally use a lot of is now more expensive. So what are my other options? Is it a like-for-like feed or as close as I need it to be to meet my cow requirements? So I'm always looking for what's the margin between what I'm going to get in milk price, and milk price unfortunately doesn't stay the same, and it's not as normally as high as it is now. So when milk price drops down, how do I keep that margin between what I'm spending to make a milk solid and what I'm getting for it?
Mark, talk us through how farmers make the most cost-effective feed purchasing decisions for their farm system. Give us a bit more detail on that.
First one is knowing in an average year, and to Enda's point, knowing the history of an area. So easier when you've been in the same area year after year. But if you're new to an area, looking around, talking to as many people, talking to neighbours, saying, what are normal growth rates for each time of the year? Is this a predominantly summer dry area? What are winters like? So that you're making a decision about buying the right type of supplement. So if I have a summer dry that's normally 3 or 4 weeks, I've got to think about what am I trying to balance in my cow's diet. So I'll be looking at more higher protein feeds, and it doesn't need to be any fancy concentrate. It can be as basic as grass silage, but then sourcing good quality grass silage or harvesting it yourself. So just looking at how much surplus you might have in the spring, does that cover a deficit in the summer? Same with the winter. What's my normal growth rate? How much grass will be in the diet? Or are they off? If they're off on a crop, have I got the right type of supplement to complement a crop? So complementing something like fodder beet versus kale versus Swedes, they're all slightly different. Or if I'm on a all winter grass diet and baleage, have I got enough feed on hand for the requirements, but also for adverse weather? We know not every winter is fine and frosty. So if it's raining, do I have that extra feed up my hand so I keep feeding the cows the requirements if utilisation of those feeds drops? So it's a combination of factors, and it's knowing what to expect and planning for that, and then how risk adverse are you? So some people will go, I'm going to contract just what I need, and I'll take a punt on if I need more, I'll go onto the spot market. Whereas other people will say, no, I will plant extra hectares of maize, or I'm going to contract an extra 10% over what I think in my budget, just for those what if type of scenarios. And then it's just going, how does that fit in my cash flow?
Earlier you mentioned marginal milk. What's that concept, and how can farmers use it to ensure their feeding strategy is financially sound?
In its purest sense, it's just understanding that when I feed the first kilogram of supplements, I am getting substitution. So I'm substituting what they would normally eat in the pasture for what they're going to eat in a shed, in a trailer, in a paddock, fed out of a wagon, or on a feed pad. So sometimes I'm after substitution. I'm looking to push more grass ahead of me going into a summer dry. And if I'm grazing harder than a 1500 residual, I know that I'm got a cow that's a bit hungrier. So I'm making money from that supplement. But when I go to kilogram 2, I'm getting that extra bit of substitution again. And then the same with kilogram 3. So the milk solids response to every kilogram fed is not a linear relationship. It starts reducing with each kilo, and so does your money return from it, obviously. So marginal milk is where you've fed more than you're getting back, or you're approaching that level. And also you got to take into account nationally, if you buy $1 worth of supplement, you're actually spending in your expenditure between $1.50 something up to over $2. So that's a lot of analysis from Dairy Base. So don't just think I've bought $1. If I make $1, I break even, or if I make $1.50, I've made a profit. There's a whole lot of associated costs with labour and R&M, depreciation, and all that goes in there as well. So take that into account. You had a very good example, Enda, about that shoulder milking as well, about pushing the boundaries too far.
First of all, marginal milk is only viable as long as the cost of producing that milk is less than the price being paid for the milk. And the shoulders of the season, the example Mark and I spoke about last night was we come into a little bit of a feed pinch in the end of May and we're still milking. There's no point in feeding like DDG or dry distiller's grain to try and squeeze more milk out of there when the cows physically can't produce. They're not going to increase their volume at that time of the season. So that's a good example of foolish use of expensive supplements when there's no return. So like Mark said, the different types of feeds are very important when you're talking about marginal milk. If you want high energy feeds like you would require in spring, there will be a return on those. But when summer or spring grasses, the month of November, December, when it's firing on all cylinders, you don't need high protein feeds at that time of the year. So marginal milk is something that you need to be it's very real, and you need to be very conscious of it. It's just so easy to turn on the switch every morning and feed more grain or more palm kernel. But unless you do the analysis and work out exactly what it's costing you, how much is that tractor going to be in the paddock with a feed out wagon with a 30% wastage factor on a wet day and feeding silage? You need to be really disciplined and organised and back your feed budget and understand your different supplements.
So, Enda, what tools do you use to help you figure all this out?
Feed walks on a Monday, which happen religiously here. There's very few weeks don't get the walk done and use that data appropriately. It's easy to do a walk, but if you don't use the information that you generated, it's a waste of a walk. Then we would go to our spreadsheets and put that information in and analyze our round speed for the specific time of the year. Consult with the staff. There's some very good tools that DairyNZ also have in their back pocket, like the supplement price calculator and the FeedChecker. So 2 very good tools that I've recently only got getting my values worth out of them, because you need every tool in the box when you're making decisions in a high payout year, because it's easy to just turn on the feed in a high payout year and say, let's feed it. But if you're not getting any more out of it, you need to use all the tools. So the FeedChecker is very important. Knowing exactly what dry matter and ME are in the different types of feeds makes huge difference to what you want to get out the other end. So the communication with the staff about how you feed, what you feed, and where you're going to place the cows for the week is also the basics done very well. Yeah, we have plenty of conversation about how we make our decisions and the tools we use to make them. So there's a lot of things go in behind the scenes before you put that reel up in the paddock and allocate what you can get it right or you can get it very wrong. Either way, you got to be very analytical of what you do.
Enda, you mentioned the supplement price calculator and the FeedChecker. Mark, do you want to tell us briefly what those are?
They're hidden gems. They are tools that have been on our website for a while. I've only just really started using them more and more with farmers or on our own farm. So basically what it does is it does all the hard work of calculating, of making sure if I'm looking at a short-term purchasing decision using the supplement price calculator, I can look at maize silage, grass silage of different qualities. I can also look at palm kernel or DDGs, and I can also make custom blends as long as I've got available what are the main levels of starch and fibre and ME that make up those blends. And then it'll tell you, given the residuals you're grazing to at the moment, the stage of lactation of your cows, your stocking rate, it's going to give you an estimated milk return. It's going to break it down into fat and protein, so not all feeds are the same. And it's going to show the effect of substitution. So you're going to put in the residual I am grazing to, and if I put the supplement in, what will be my residual afterwards. So it'll start showing you at what residual your profitability starts dropping off if you throw lots of scenarios at it. Great tool for if I'm in the midst of something unplanned, how do I make a quick decision, but an economic one, not just, ring up and get what's available today on a whim. The other one, FeedChecker, is sort of another level deep than that. So you're putting in all your information, how many cows you're milking, you're putting in stage of lactation again, so it's taking account of everything. You're putting in what your current production is, and it's telling you what your cow requires in their diet. So as you put all your feed in there from pasture, the quality of the pasture, what type of supplement, a lot of the usual supplements are in there, but again, you can customize it for blends and work with your feed company to get all the detail you need. And it's going to tell you, am I feeding what the cow's required diet is? It's also pointing out if I'm overfeeding. I'm feeding to my most limiting factor. So if I'm putting extra starch in, or I'm putting extra protein or extra fiber, it's going to tell you, and it's telling you if you put the cost of those feeds in, it's telling you what it's costing you per cow and in total per day to feed your animals those supplements. So you can put in options and look at, is there a way of tweaking my system depending on payout, price, what's available? Can I get my cows to where I want them to be feed-wise at the cheapest possible price. And it's a brilliant tool which takes all the hard work out. It's created using New Zealand science, so it's pasture-based. It's not using TMR science from overseas, so you can rely on the output being something that you'll see physically turn up in the milk and on farm.
Thank you, Mark. Enda, you've talked about being proactive versus reactive and how that can save you time and money. How do you balance cost and risk to be prepared and make profitable decisions? And how risk averse are you?
When you've lived through snowstorms and wet weather events, you always need to have some up your sleeve. Myself, particularly, don't like too much risk. I like to have enough feed on hand. I mean, as a farmer, I want to feed my cows well. Do I want to break the bank to do it? No, but there must be a point where I want to sleep at night and keep my animals well fed. So there's plenty of times I've made decisions to purchase the norm plus 10%, and I like fixed contracts. Like our barley is fixed contract, our palm kernel is. If we need to go to the market for extra, I know I can, but I don't want to leave myself too short. We always, from a wintering point of view, we winter off farm, but when we sit down and do the figures and we work on about 19 tonnes per hectare of kale, I always ask the grazier nicely to put in an extra 2 or 3 hectares because in that period there, if the cows fall short in June, July, it takes 6 months to start to make that deficit back up on the dairy farm. So no, I would always want to have spare. And silage in a bale doesn't go out of date. Grain in a silo doesn't go out of date. So it's assurance feed, and it's just like money in the bank. It's there to be used at a further date.
Okay. And Mark, how do you see other farmers balancing cost and risk?
It's kind of in the same boat as fixing milk price or fixing your interest rates. Every farm is unique, and some will play on the margins and say, look, I'm going to, as I said earlier, just take what I think I'll need or contract 80% of what they think they're going to do in a season. Whereas more farmers, like Enda said, will go, I know what the prediction of milk price is at the start of the season, and I'm going to put that in my budget, and I'm going to work out where does my costs need to be at for me to make a decent margin. And they'll lock all that in at the start, knowing that payout can go up and it can also go down. But most people will forecast their milk price at a level that they think is reasonable to give me a profit. I don't think I found any budgets at the start of the season that said $9.50 in them. Ours definitely didn't. I don't know if Enda's did. We had $7.50, and I've seen a lot of people that were between $7.50 and $8. So they were making their feed purchasing decisions based on that. And then given that milk price, they were saying, well, can I afford that extra bit of security given lots of wet summers for many areas in a row? And then you start thinking, well, surely there's a dry one coming. Vice versa, I might have had a dry summer, and I'm thinking, surely I can't have another one. So you might be going, I'm gonna expect a better summer. But it's that same financial and physical balance, and it's going to be individual, depending on system and farmer and debt levels. You know what I mean? Like, not every farmer is at 5% debt, so that's going to pay an impact as well.
Okay, so we don't always see a feed shortage coming, as you've said. Enda, how do you handle unexpected feed shortages?
Sure, look, there's many ways to handle a feed shortage. I mean, depending on the time of the year, of course. But I mean, after Christmas, sort of that February period when you maybe have the first round of your pregnancy scanning results in, and you can nominate some cows that may not be pregnant that can go to the works early to better look after the ones that are left behind. You could milk your cows on once a day. You could milk them on 10 and 7, the new craze, and you can better look after your cows via that, but depending on the situation you're in. Obviously, like, you can purchase more feed if there was a feed shortage. It would depend on if the shortage was grass in a drought, you could purchase in more supplement. If the shortage was the supplement, you could maybe purchase in more grass silage from a different region. But lightening the load is one quick way, instantaneous way of reducing the feed demand.
And as Enda said, it depends on time of the season. If it's August and it's extra cold, I'm not going to, unless I've got some very obvious suspects to cull, like some late cows that are really late or have turned up empty over the autumn-winter period. Obviously, I'm going to get rid of those. But I tend to then go, what is the cheapest option available to fill this short-term feed deficit, knowing that spring's coming? And then as you get further and further through the season, you're getting more information. So you're getting a first herd test. Is there anything obvious in my first herd test, which means why am I still milking this cow? She might be extremely high sow count. And if I look back last season, she was a problem. So obviously she hasn't got any better over the winter period, over the dry off. So I'm going to cull her. As I get my second herd test and I see possible summer dry coming, I can then make another decision. And then it's, what do I do with my empty cows and how long do I foresee I can milk my cows and get the body condition score, pasture cover I need over winter. So it's the balancing act of reducing the amount of mouths and feeding the mouths that are going to give me the best return and be there next year, hopefully giving me a replacement.
Mark, I'm conscious that we've been talking in the context of spring calving farms. How does what we're talking about differ for farms that, are split calving or autumn calving?
The same principles apply, but say if you were autumn calving and I've just been down in the lower North Island on a sole autumn calving herd, looking at when I'm calving in autumn and a lot of my peak milk production is starting to happen over winter, that's a different scenario to peak milk happening in the spring. So just making sure I've got that right balance in my diet, and it's more than just the balance in my supplement, it's balance across my whole diet, making sure that I haven't got anything that's going to limit the potential of those cows to produce and get in calf. And it's the same with split calving herds, because the underlying reason why people are autumn calving and split calving is they're trying to meet a balance between pasture production and demand. So they're trying to get feed demand and supply aligned by doing it in a different way, because they might have longer dry summers. They might, if you're in Northland, you're growing more in the average winter than you are in the average summer. So how do I align those, but also ensure that I'm feeding my cows what they require, given they're at a different time of lactation at a different time of the year? So that's where tools like FeedChecker really become useful, because you can look forward in the tool and say, okay, their cow was this far into lactation at this stage of the year. I'm expecting, only 3 or 4 kilos of grass available. What are the other things that I need? Is it just grass silage, or is it grass silage plus something else? And I can also factor in, if it's over winter, my utilization in the paddock is probably lower. So anything fed in a paddock versus fed through a shed or on a feed pad is going to make an economic difference. Vice versa, over summer, normally grazing conditions are better, or if I'm feeding out in a paddock, utilization is better. So I can be a bit more flexible.
All right, thank you both. That brings us to the end of today's episode. A huge thank you to Mark Williams and Enda Hawe for sharing their expertise and helping us all think smarter about managing feed shortages. We have covered a lot, from evaluating feed deficits to choosing cost-effective supplements and making the most of the tools like DairyNZ supplement price calculator and the FeedChecker. If there's one takeaway, it's this: a well thought out and analytical plan beats a rushed decision every time. Taking the time to understand your options and focusing on what's most cost-effective for your circumstances and your aversion or not aversion to risk can make a world of difference. If you'd like to explore the tools and resources we mentioned, head to dairynz.co.nz. You'll find everything from calculators to practical guides to help you make the best decisions for your system. We've also linked to these in the show notes. Mā te wā. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Talking Dairy. Make sure to hit follow so you can keep up to date with our latest episodes. You can also keep up with DairyNZ News on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn, or go to our website and sign up for our fortnightly DairyNZ News emails. As always, if you have any feedback on this podcast or have some ideas for future topics or guests to have on the show, please email us at talkingdairy@dairynz.co.nz. Mā te wā, Mōri ora, catch you next time.